The stories of Kim Langwell, a 25-year search for truth. Imagine this: a hardworking mom planning a family dinner vanishes without a trace. A car abandoned, cryptic clues left behind, and a family desperate for answers. What unfolds is a 25-year-long mystery full of twists, secrets, and chilling revelations. This is the story of Kim Langwell. Before we dive in, do us a small favor. If you're into gripping mysteries and true crime stories, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and spread the word by sharing this video with your friends. Every interaction helps us uncover and share more compelling stories like this one. Now let's get into it. In the summer of 1999, a disturbing mystery unfolded in the quiet town of Beaumont, Texas. A hardworking mother disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a loving daughter and a fiancé who would spend years searching for answers. What began as an ordinary Friday would soon turn into the start of a 25-year quest for truth, as investigators uncovered a trail of haunting clues that pointed to something sinister. The story begins with Kim Langwell, a woman whose life had been shaped by both challenges and determination. Born on Christmas Eve of 1965 in Houston, Kim grew up in a close-knit family, showing early signs of the strength that would define her life. Her world changed dramatically at 18 when she became a mother to a beautiful baby girl named Tiffany. Just as she was learning to navigate motherhood, Tiffany's father walked away, leaving Kim to face the responsibilities of parenthood alone. Refusing to let this setback define her future, Kim made a brave decision to move to Beaumont with her daughter. The early days were far from easy. She would often rush between 3 different jobs, working endless hours to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. But Kim's persistence eventually paid off when she secured a position at a local oil refinery. Finally, she could breathe a little easier and spend more precious time with Tiffany. Life seemed to be falling into place when Kim met Ken at the refinery. Their connection was instant and deep, leading to an engagement that filled both their hearts with joy. They began dreaming of a future together, blending their families and creating new memories. Ken proved to be not just a partner to Kim, but also a caring figure in Tiffany's life. July 9th, 1999 started like any other summer day. Kim, now 34, was looking forward to a family dinner that evening with Ken and her 15-year-old daughter. Her shift at the refinery was scheduled to end at 5 p.m., giving her plenty of time to get ready for their evening plans. Around 5:15 p.m., she called Tiffany, her voice cheerful as she talked about their dinner plans. She mentioned needing to run a few errands first, warning she might be a bit late getting home. The first signs of trouble appeared when Ken arrived at Kim's house at 6:30 p.m. The driveway was empty and the house was dark. At first, they weren't too worried. After all, she had mentioned being late, but when their calls went straight to voicemail, an unusual knot of worry began to form in their stomachs. Kim always answered her phone, especially when Tiffany called. As night fell over Beaumont, Ken's concern turned to action. Around 10 p.m., he got in his car and began retracing what should have been Kim's route home. He drove past the refinery, checked nearby shops, and asked anyone he met if they had seen her. His persistent search led him to a local pharmacy where he made a chilling discovery. Kim's car sat empty in the parking lot, with no sign of her anywhere nearby. The vehicle stood as a silent witness to whatever had happened to Kim that evening, holding secrets that would take decades to uncover. This is just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Beaumont for the next quarter century, leaving a family searching for answers and investigators puzzling over a case that seemed to have more questions than clues. The pharmacy parking lot felt eerily quiet as Ken searched the surrounding area. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across empty sidewalks and closed storefronts, but revealed no trace of Kim. Fighting back his growing unease, he tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe she'd met a friend and decided to go somewhere else. Perhaps she changed her mind about dinner and caught a ride with someone. Even as these thoughts crossed his mind, Ken knew they didn't quite make sense. Kim would have called, would have let them know. Still, he clung to these comforting possibilities as he drove home that night, telling himself everything would make sense in the morning. But when dawn broke and Ken returned to the pharmacy, his heart sank. Kim's car sat exactly where he'd found it the night before, looking abandoned in the morning light. The reality he'd been trying to deny could no longer be ignored. Something was terribly wrong. Kim hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't reached out to anyone. With trembling fingers, he dialed the police, knowing this call would change everything. The police response was swift and thorough. Their investigation began with Kim's car, which held its own disturbing clues. While there were no obvious signs of violence, no blood, no signs of struggle, what they did find sent chills down their spines. Kim's cell phone lay abandoned inside. For a woman known to always keep in touch, especially with her teenage daughter, leaving her phone behind seemed completely out of character. The investigation took an unexpected turn when officers interviewed Tiffany, Kim's daughter. As the last person to speak with her mother, Tiffany shared a crucial piece of information that would reshape the entire investigation. She revealed that her mother had planned to visit Terry, an ex-boyfriend, after work. Terry had asked for Kim's help with what seemed like a simple task, holding up some shelves while he mounted them to the wall. Despite their breakup 6 months earlier, they had maintained occasional contact, though things weren't as friendly as they appeared on the surface. When Tiffany called Terry that night, desperately searching for news of her mother, his response was brief and dismissive. According to him, Kim had stopped by for just a few minutes before leaving. But as investigators dug deeper into Terry's relationship with Kim, a disturbing pattern emerged from conversations with her friends and family. What had started as a seemingly normal relationship had gradually revealed its darker nature. Terry, who initially presented himself as a decent, caring partner, showed his true colors over time. Friends watched with growing concern as his behavior became increasingly controlling. He would blow up Kim's phone with constant calls, demanding to know her whereabouts and questioning who she spent time with. Even the smallest things could trigger his anger, leading to heated arguments that left Kim drained and upset. The picture that emerged was of a man obsessed with control, someone who viewed Kim not as a partner, but as a possession. When Kim finally gathered the courage to end the relationship, it hadn't gone smoothly. The breakup, which should have been an ending, instead opened a new chapter of tension and unease. Terry's presence lingered in Kim's life like a shadow, making what should have been a fresh start feel more like an uneasy truce. Now, with Kim missing and Terry being the last known person to see her, the police began to look at their troubled history with renewed interest. The simple story of helping with shelves started to feel like something much more sinister, especially given Terry's history of controlling behavior. As investigators pieced together the events of that evening, they couldn't ignore the nagging question: what really happened during that final visit to Terry's house? The full story of Kim's relationship with Terry began to unfold like pages from a horror novel. When she tried to end their 7-year relationship, Terry revealed just how deep his obsession ran. His tactics switched between sweet promises of change and dark threats of violence, creating an emotional roller coaster that left Kim constantly on edge. Even after she finally broke free, Terry maintained a subtle presence in her life, not overtly threatening, but enough to keep her looking over her shoulder. Kim's friends painted a picture of a woman trapped in an impossible situation. She kept minimal contact with Terry, not out of choice, but out of fear. Her daughter Tiffany's safety weighed heavily on her mind, and she believed that completely cutting Terry off might push him over the edge. As one friend later told police, Kim was playing a dangerous balancing act, trying to keep the peace while keeping her distance. The investigation took a chilling turn when Kim's closest friends shared a confession she had made months before her disappearance. During one particularly frightening incident, Terry had wrapped his hands around her throat during an argument. The memory of those moments haunted Kim, leaving her with a terrifying premonition. She had pulled her friends aside one day, her voice trembling as she told them, "If anything ever happens to me, look in Terry's backyard first." These words, spoken in fear, now echoed with devastating prophecy. Armed with this disturbing background, police zeroed in on Terry. His story about Kim's brief visit to help with shelves seemed paper-thin when viewed against their troubled history. Even more suspicious was his alibi, or lack thereof. Terry claimed he'd spent the evening at a local bar, but only after a crucial 4-hour gap following Kim's visit. Those missing hours loomed large in the investigation, a black hole of time where anything could have happened. Despite their suspicions, investigators hit a wall. A thorough search of Terry's property turned up empty. No evidence, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest Kim had met with foul play there. Forensic experts combed through every inch of Kim's abandoned car, but it too kept its secrets. The case seemed to be growing cold until a surprising new thread emerged from Kim's workplace. What Kim's friends revealed next shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. They spoke of another man who had been making Kim's life difficult. Her boss, Frank. His unwanted attention had started subtly enough with casual flirting that Kim tried to brush off professionally. But Frank's behavior had escalated into something more concerning. He began flooding her desk with love letters, not just a few, but over 100 of them, each one more passionate and inappropriate than the last. The situation had left Kim walking another precarious tightrope. As a single mother depending on her job to support Tiffany, she couldn't simply tell off her married boss or quit. Instead, she developed her own form of insurance policy. Every letter Frank sent her was carefully preserved and given to her friends for safekeeping. "Keep these," she had told them, her voice serious. "If anything happens to me, these letters might explain why." It was as if Kim had sensed she was surrounded by danger, but couldn't be sure which direction the threat would come from. The discovery of Frank's obsession added a new layer of complexity to the investigation. Here was another man who had shown troubling behavior toward Kim, another person who might have had a motive to harm her. The question now facing investigators was whether they had been focusing on the wrong suspect all along. As investigators dove into Frank's letters, a disturbing portrait emerged of a man whose interest had crossed far beyond workplace attraction. The letters revealed an escalating obsession, each page filled with increasingly intense declarations of love and desire. But Frank's fixation wasn't limited to written words. Kim's friends described how he would slowly cruise past her house multiple times each day, his car moving at a crawl as he watched her windows. Sometimes he would park across the street, sitting there for hours, just watching. What made his behavior even more unsettling was his complete disregard for Kim's engagement to Ken, who worked at the same company. It was as if, in Frank's mind, Ken didn't even exist. The timing of Kim's disappearance raised red flags for the investigators. She had vanished shortly after leaving work, where Frank, as her boss, would have known her schedule and movements. The detectives recognized two possible motives that made Frank a serious suspect. First, his obsession might have reached a breaking point, leading him to take drastic action when Kim continued to reject his advances. Second, and perhaps more compelling, was the possibility that Frank feared exposure. If Kim had decided to report his harassment to the company or tell his wife about the letters, his career and marriage would have been destroyed. When brought in for questioning, Frank's behavior set off alarm bells for the experienced detectives. He attempted to downplay his feelings for Kim, describing them as nothing more than a small crush that he'd gotten over long ago. But his most bizarre claim came when he flatly denied writing any letters to Kim, even though investigators had over 100 of them sitting in evidence boxes. The disconnect between his denials and the physical proof in front of them painted a picture of a man either unable or unwilling to face reality. Frank's alibi for the evening of Kim's disappearance raised more questions than it answered. He produced a store receipt timestamped at 6:56 p.m., followed by witnesses who confirmed he'd hosted a poker game later that night, but there was a crucial gap in his timeline, more than an hour between when Kim left work and when Frank appeared at the store. When pressed about this window of time, Frank offered no explanation, creating another mysterious void in the investigation, much like the unexplained hours in Terry's alibi. The investigation team expanded their search beyond suspect interviews. They meticulously traced Kim's likely route that evening, hoping to find security cameras that might have captured her movements. They followed her potential path from work to Terry's house and finally to the pharmacy parking lot where her car was found. But in 1999, surveillance cameras were far less common than today, and this effort led nowhere. Her phone records offered little help, showing only her final call to Tiffany before going silent forever. As days turned into weeks, the search for Kim intensified. Police organized search parties that combed through every neighborhood, vacant lot, and wooded area in and around Beaumont. Volunteers from the community joined in, determined to find any trace of the missing mother. Local news stations ran regular updates, and police held press conferences asking for anyone with information to come forward. Missing person posters with Kim's photo appeared on store windows and telephone poles throughout the city. But just as the investigation seemed to be hitting another dead end, new witnesses came forward with troubling stories about Terry. Their accounts would add yet another dark layer to this already complex case, suggesting that perhaps the investigation's first suspect deserved a closer look. These new revelations would force detectives to question whether they'd been too quick to shift their focus away from Terry, even as Frank's suspicious behavior clouded the waters. The case was becoming a maze of possibilities, with each potential lead seeming to circle back on itself. Two suspects, two windows of unaccounted time, and two very different but equally disturbing patterns of obsessive behavior. Somewhere in this tangle of evidence and alibis lay the truth about what happened to Kim Langwell, but finding it would prove to be far more difficult than anyone initially imagined. In the raw days following Kim's disappearance, her sister made a bold decision that would reveal a chilling side of Terry's personality. Driven by the family's growing suspicions, she went to confront him at his home, hoping to find some answers or perhaps see a glimpse of remorse. Instead, what she encountered sent shivers down her spine. Terry didn't just seem unconcerned about Kim's disappearance, he actually mocked her family's pain, treating their anguish as some kind of twisted joke. His cold behavior only deepened their conviction that he was involved in Kim's vanishing. A crucial piece of information emerged from an unexpected source, one of Terry's own employees. Since Terry ran his business from his property, workers often came and went throughout the day. One employee's account would punch a serious hole in Terry's story. According to this witness, he had arrived at Terry's house around 5:50 p.m. on the day Kim disappeared and saw her car parked outside. This single observation sparked immediate questions. Kim had left work at 5:15 p.m. and Terry had insisted she only stopped by briefly. But if her car was still there at 5:50 p.m., she had been at his house for at least 35 minutes, far longer than the few minutes Terry claimed. The investigation took another turn when multiple witnesses came forward with an observation that would further unravel Terry's story. They reported seeing Terry's distinctive tow truck near the pharmacy parking lot where Kim's car was later found. The timing was crucial. Witnesses placed the tow truck there around 6:45 p.m., directly contradicting Terry's claim that he had stayed home all evening. This sighting suggested a disturbing possibility. Had Terry somehow transported Kim's car to the pharmacy lot himself? As months stretched into years, Kim's family lived in a perpetual state of uncertainty and grief. While they never wavered in their belief that Terry was responsible, proving it seemed impossible. Terry's behavior during this time only fueled their suspicions. In one particularly unsettling incident, he called the family to announce he planned to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence. Then, in an almost casual tone, he added that he would probably fail it. This strange declaration left the family wondering, was this his way of taunting them? The psychological torment didn't end there. Terry would periodically call Kim's family, asking if they had heard from her. His tone during these calls was oddly casual, as if Kim had simply gone on vacation and might return any day. These calls felt less like genuine inquiry and more like a cruel reminder of their loss. Adding to their distress, someone had been making silent phone calls to Kim's relatives for years. Though they couldn't prove it, the family was convinced Terry was behind these calls, using them as another way to maintain his psychological hold over them. Perhaps the most disturbing incident came 3 years after Kim's disappearance, showing that Terry's obsession hadn't faded with time. He approached Tiffany, Kim's daughter, on the street and began questioning her about whether she'd heard from her mother. The encounter left Tiffany shaken. Here was the man her family believed responsible for her mother's disappearance, casually asking about her as if nothing had happened. This interaction demonstrated either a remarkable level of callousness or a desperate need to know if his secrets were still safe. Throughout all these years, Terry's behavior followed a pattern that investigators had seen before in other cases, a mix of casual indifference and calculated actions that seemed designed to keep Kim's family off balance. He appeared to take a perverse pleasure in their suffering, regularly inserting himself into their lives just enough to remind them of their loss. Yet despite the mountain of suspicious behavior, hard evidence remained elusive. Terry seemed to know exactly how far he could push without crossing the line into provable criminal activity, leaving the police frustrated and Kim's family trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. The confrontation between Kim's sister and Terry led to one of the most chilling moments in the investigation. As she demanded he leave Tiffany alone, Terry's response sent ice through her veins. With an unsettling smile, he asked, "Aren't you curious about which polygraph question I failed? It was the one where they asked if I killed Kim." The family rushed to report this apparent confession to the police, but once again they hit the familiar wall. Without concrete evidence, Terry's words, however disturbing, weren't enough to prove his guilt. The investigation entered a long period of silence, with leads growing colder by the day. 8 years into the mystery, investigators made a renewed attempt to solve the case, meticulously reviewing every statement, every piece of evidence and every timeline. But Terry had grown more defensive over the years, refusing to answer any questions or cooperate with authorities. It seemed the truth about Kim's disappearance might remain buried forever. Then, in early 2024, a fresh ray of hope emerged from an unexpected source. The Oxygen True Crime documentary team, known for their thorough investigations of cold cases, decided to feature Kim's story. Their approach was comprehensive, starting with emotional interviews with Kim's friends and family, who had spent a quarter century carrying the weight of her unsolved disappearance. The documentary team's investigation led them to the two main suspects who had dominated the original case. Frank, Kim's former boss, agreed to participate in the documentary, but his interview only deepened the mystery. Even after 25 years, his behavior remained bizarrely defensive. Despite the stack of love letters and evidence, he continued to deny any romantic interest in Kim, maintaining his innocence with the same unconvincing arguments he'd used decades earlier. The investigation's most dramatic moment came when the team turned their attention to Terry. After he refused their request for an interview, they made the bold decision to confront him at his home. What happened next seemed to confirm the family's long-held suspicions. Upon seeing the documentary crew through his window, Terry's reaction was immediate and telling. He bolted for the back door, making a desperate attempt to reach his car. Only the crew's quick thinking and blocking his escape route forced him to face their questions. Terry's explanation for his attempted flight strained credibility. He claimed he hadn't seen the crew and wasn't trying to run, despite clear evidence to the contrary. When pressed about his relationship with Kim, his responses painted a picture completely different from the one shared by her friends and family. He portrayed himself as unbothered by their breakup, a stark contrast to the stories of threats and erratic behavior that Kim had confided to her loved ones. Perhaps the most damning development came when Terry began contradicting his own previous statements to police. His original story about Kim helping him mount shelves suddenly changed. Now he claimed she had only come to collect her belongings from his house. This discrepancy, seemingly small on the surface, represented a crucial break in Terry's carefully maintained narrative. After 25 years of telling the same story, why would he suddenly change such a fundamental detail? The documentary's impact reached beyond television screens and into the legal system. The inconsistencies in Terry's new statements, combined with his suspicious behavior during filming, caught the attention of local investigators. The case file, which had gathered dust for so many years, was once again pulled from the archives. After the episode aired, prosecutors began preparing for what would become a bold and unprecedented move in this decades-old case. The family watched these developments with a mix of hope and trepidation. Could this documentary, arriving 25 years after Kim's disappearance, finally provide the breakthrough they had been waiting for? Terry's contradictions and his attempt to flee from the cameras seemed to confirm what they had believed all along. But would it be enough to finally bring justice for Kim? By early 2024, prosecutors had reached a turning point. Despite lacking physical evidence, they prepared to charge Terry with murder. The years of suspicious behavior, contradicting statements, and apparent psychological games had painted such a compelling picture of guilt that they were willing to take the case to trial. Their strategy was bold but risky. They hoped either new evidence would emerge during the proceedings or Terry's pattern of suspicious behavior would convince a jury of his guilt. But fate had one final dramatic twist in store. The documentary's airing stirred something in the conscience of a witness who had carried a dark secret for years. After watching the episode, this person finally stepped forward with information that would break the case wide open. They revealed a chilling confession Terry had made years earlier. He had admitted to killing his ex-girlfriend and burying her body on his property. The detail matched exactly what Kim had warned her friends about before her disappearance. Armed with this new testimony, investigators returned to Terry's property, this time with advanced technology that hadn't existed in 1999. Teams of forensic experts arrived with ground-penetrating radar equipment, methodically scanning every inch of the property. For days, they worked tirelessly, until finally, the radar revealed something disturbing beneath Terry's bedroom floor, an anomaly approximately the size of a human body. The discovery became even more suspicious when experts noticed that in this specific spot, pieces of rebar had been deliberately cut away from the concrete foundation. It was the only section of the foundation missing its steel reinforcement, standing out like a signature of guilt written in concrete and steel. As investigators began breaking through the floor, the truth they had sought for 25 years finally emerged. Wrapped in a blanket and buried in the earth was a set of human remains. The forensic analysis confirmed what everyone had feared. They had finally found Kim Langwell. Terry's arrest came swiftly after the discovery. The man who had spent 25 years playing psychological games with Kim's family, who had mocked their pain and teased them with hints about failed polygraph tests, now faced the justice he had so long evaded. At 67 years old, he found himself behind bars, awaiting a trial scheduled for spring 2025. The concrete floor beneath his own bedroom had finally revealed his dark secret. Tiffany, who had lost her mother at age 15 and grown into adulthood without her, took action beyond the criminal proceedings. She filed a civil lawsuit against Terry, seeking not just compensation for her loss, but also aiming to prevent him from using his financial resources to mount an expensive defense. Her legal strategy showed the same determination her mother had once displayed in the face of adversity. The case's resolution brought mixed emotions for the original investigators. Critical questions arose about why Terry's property hadn't been more thoroughly searched in 1999, especially given Kim's explicit warning to her friends. Some speculated that Terry might have initially hidden Kim's body elsewhere, only moving her beneath his bedroom after the initial investigation concluded. The limitations of 1999's forensic technology compared to today's advanced tools might also explain why earlier searches missed what modern equipment so quickly found. Despite these lingering questions, the discovery brought a measure of peace to Kim's family. After 25 years of uncertainty, they could finally lay her to rest with dignity. The proper burial they had been denied for so long could at last take place. As they prepared for Terry's trial, they found solace in knowing that Kim had known her killer all along. Her final warning to friends about where to look for her body had eventually led to the truth, even if it took a quarter century for that truth to emerge. The case stands as a testament to the importance of never giving up on justice, no matter how much time passes. It also serves as a reminder that sometimes the most crucial evidence lies exactly where the victim said it would be, if only we have the right tools and determination to find it. As Terry awaits trial, Kim's family finally has what they sought for 25 years: answers, closure, and the opportunity to see justice served for the mother, daughter, and sister they lost so long ago.